Welcome to the Colleges Wales Teach Pod podcast series. Supported by Welsh Government, these 10-minute sessions offer further education lecturers and work-based learning practitioners practical learning and teaching tips. With contributions from colleges from across Wales, the series offers professional learning opportunities for staff in the FE sector to hear about examples of best practice. There are 4 key themes: resilience, digital, differentiation and A-level pedagogy. For further information, please visit colleges.wales.
Hello, my name is Leah Moore. I'm the digital content producer at Coleg Gwent, and I'm joined today by Glyn Rogers, the digital teaching lead at Coleg Gwent.
Hello.
And today we're looking at differentiation. Now, it's a big topic, so let's dive straight in. Glyn, what do we mean when we talk about differentiation?
Right. Well, the aim of differentiation is to extend the knowledge and skills of every student, with emphasis on the every there, in our class, regardless of their starting point and at the pace at which they learn.
Okay, so what does that actually mean for the learner?
Right. Well, we want every learner in our class to be experiencing desirable difficulties. Now, that might sound counterintuitive, but what this means is we really want the learners to be working and thinking quite hard to recall information when they are completing a task. So this is different to tasks that give the impression that they are learning, things like just rereading over notes, for example. Desirable difficulties need more effort from the learner at the time, but the hope is that it results in more long-term learning. So when we talk about differentiation, we want all our learners to be experiencing some form of desirable difficulty within the lesson. A different way of looking at it is that we want all the learners in the class to be in the zone, this area between what they know and their learning goal. A psychologist called Vygotsky called this the zone of proximal development. So when we're planning our lessons, we're planning to make sure that we're not giving too much guidance or too little guidance, so that all the learners are in that zone.
This sounds like it's much easier said than done, Glyn.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and it's part of the art of teaching. But what's more is we've seen a narrowing of this idea of what differentiation is. So we've seen it narrowly focused, for example, on just providing differentiated tasks within a lesson. Now, for me, that can cause extra workload for the teacher, but it can also actually limit learning. So this is why I think we need to take a broader view of differentiation.
Okay, so what do you mean by limit learning here, Glyn?
What I mean is that if, for example, I gave a pre-prepared worksheet to a learner according to what I think is their ability, I'm effectively stopping them from accessing more challenging material. I'm sort of putting a cap, if you like, on their learning. I could be preventing them from being in that zone. So instead, an author called Carol Ann Tomlinson in her book argues that we should be teaching up. Another way of looking at it, I suppose, would be to say that we are aiming high or stretching and challenging the learners, I suppose.
Okay, so can you explain the idea of teaching up a little more here, Glyn?
So rather than planning an activity for an average learner in the class, if there is such a thing, and then making it easier for some learners, we plan for learning that will put the more advanced learners in that zone. And then we differentiate by providing scaffolding that enables the less advanced learners to work on that task. So it's about taking a broader view, and there's a range of ways then we can differentiate that doesn't limit the learner towards that goal. And what that doesn't mean, though, is that we neglect the basic entitlement of students or learners with particular learning needs.
Okay, I want to talk about scaffolding a little later on, but first, can you explain what you mean by a broader view of differentiation?
Right, well, once again, Carol Ann Tomlinson's book writes that teaching is far more than just making different resources. There's an art form to it, and it's interconnected things when we teach. So when we talk about differentiation, we should be thinking about how all the different elements of teaching work together, and how a teacher can proactively, if you like, respond to a learner's needs. Now, she identifies 5 general principles of differentiation, and forgive me, Lee, I've got them written down here somewhere. Here we are. And so the first one is an environment that encourages and supports learning, a quality curriculum, assessment, and that's something that's really important, and how it informs the teaching and learning, and how the teacher uses that then to respond to the variance in what the learner knows. And finally, it's helping the learner to manage their own routines and self-regulate.
Okay, so let's start with the first one then. Can you describe an environment that will encourage and support learning?
Right. Well, when we talk about desirable difficulties, we are talking about effort. And if we don't create the right environment in the classroom, then the learners may not see any purpose in making that effort. If they have what Carol Dweck would describe as a fixed mindset, then the learners will not feel comfortable with that struggle and making mistakes, and so they're less likely to meet their goals. So we want to create the conditions where the learner sees mistakes as a learning opportunity. Now, this is what Dweck would call a growth mindset, and it's very popular in education at the moment. Teachers are really important here in setting that growth mindset. We want learners to value that struggle. Now, they say that teachers make the weather in the classroom in terms of mood and ambiance. So let's make sure we don't inadvertently cause stormy weather in the language we use and the way we interact with learners. We make sure that they feel seen and they feel supported, and we acknowledge that they have different mindsets and attitudes, and it's about being alive to that variance and proactively working to create the right environment for learning.
Can you talk about how assessment works with differentiation?
Right, so this is Caroline Tomlinson's second point, and we talked earlier about learners making progress no matter what their starting point is. Well, for this to happen, we need to know what that starting point is. So people will shudder when they hear the word data, but if we use it in a meaningful way to help identify where a learner is, then that can only be a good thing. But it's formative assessment. That's where it's at, really, being responsive to a learner's needs in the classroom while they're actually learning and providing live feedback to them. So it's important that we use formative feedback at the time to address gaps in knowledge or misconceptions. And this can be things like questioning, it can be low stakes quizzes, mini whiteboard activities, exits, tickets. Think of assessment really as the compass for planning for differentiation in the classroom. And I think this is going to be something that's going to become even more important after COVID, where learners have had a wide variety of learning experiences over the past year or so.
I said I'd come back to scaffolding. So we've talked about teaching up and making sure we pitch the lessons at the more advanced learners and then provide the scaffolding to help the less advanced reach the same point. Can you elaborate on this idea of scaffolding, please, Glyn?
Right, so a lot of this is bread and butter stuff for teachers. It'll be things like writing frames or sentence stems, breaking problems down into smaller parts or chunks, providing examples, worked examples where the teacher might work through a problem themselves so that they are the model on how you would complete a task. Some of these learners just won't know how to do it until they are shown. It could be about providing really clear rubrics for the learner so they know how to access the marks, about sharing the success criteria with them, and explicitly teaching them how to think and reflect on their learning. And this is what is called metacognition. And you can use things like graphic organizers, mind maps, concept maps, and Venn diagrams to help with that.
Okay. Last question. What will happen in the future with differentiation?
Now, this is quite exciting. Technology is already being used to adapt the content it provides to learners after tests. And we call this adaptive learning. Now, a learner, for example, who had a gap in their knowledge in a quiz on, say, well, I'm a geography teacher, so say the water cycle, would automatically be given more work on that topic, perhaps framed in a different way. So the idea is that the learner reaches a level of mastery before they move on. Now, this would lead to a more bespoke learning experience, but the end goal is still the same. So I think technology will play a bigger role in teaching and learning in the future, but there will always be a need for a teacher at the heart of effective, big picture differentiation.
Right, well, we've packed a lot into this episode. Thanks for joining me today, Glyn.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And thanks everyone for listening.
With contributions from FE professionals from across Wales, The Colleges Wales Teach Pod podcast series offers a series of short teaching and learning tips, which you can put into practice straight away. The range of podcasts is broad, with sessions covering the themes of resilience, digital, differentiation, and A-level pedagogy. Find out more today.